I'm Marlene Hendricks, at 61. Years old, and when my husband Calvin died, after 38 years of marriage, the silence in our house became unbearable. I'd wake up each morning expecting to hear him in the kitchen humming off key while the coffee brewed, and then I'd remember all over again that he was gone. The creaking floorboards didn't just echo his footsteps. They made the house feel bigger, colder, emptier. The home we built together on Davenport Lane no longer felt like mine. I tried to hold on, but grief has a way of making even the familiar feel strange and heavy. The only calls that came were from my daughter Tabitha, and each one ended with the same suggestion. "Mom, you need to sell the house." Before I go any further, let me know where you are listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been asked to give up the place where your whole life lived. I didn't want to leave. I'd lived in that house since I was 23, and everything inside it held a memory. Calvin's rocking chair by the window, the mahogany chest of drawers my mother gave me after our wedding, the soft sound of the screen door slapping shut in the spring. But Tabitha was persistent. She said I'd be safer with her. She said the upkeep was too much and that I shouldn't be alone. She lived in Sherville with her husband Vince and their 2 children, a big house in a nice neighborhood, and she said there was plenty of room for me. I wasn't ready, but loneliness can press in on you like a wall. And one morning, after another quiet breakfast at the kitchen table, I agreed. We listed the house. It sold faster than I thought it would, and for more than I'd expected, I opened a new account and deposited the check, just like Tabitha told me to. And then I packed what I could into a few boxes, gave away the rest, and left the only home I'd ever known. Tabitha and Vince welcomed me with open arms. They'd turned Vince's old study on the first floor into a bedroom for me and told me I wouldn't need to worry about stairs. Their home was big and modern with spotless counters and sleek furniture. Everything matched and everything had a place. I did my best to be helpful. I cooked dinner. I picked up the children from school. I kept busy because the thought of sitting still in someone else's house made me feel like I was disappearing. The children were sweet. Rosie, especially. She was 13 and often came to sit with me while I knitted or peeled apples for pie. She'd talk about school or books or ask me about how Grandpa used to fix the fence every summer. But over time, something shifted. Vince stopped talking when I entered the room. Tabitha's tone grew clipped, polite, but strained. I'd offer to make dinner, and she'd say, "No thanks, Mom. I've got it planned." And then she'd smile like she was trying not to wince. I didn't push back. I didn't want to be a burden. I thought maybe if I stayed out of the way, things would settle, but they didn't. They just got quieter, colder, tighter. One night, Tabitha came home from work beaming. Vince had gotten a promotion, and they were throwing a party to celebrate. She said they'd already ordered catering, and then she hesitated before adding, "Maybe you should visit your friend Muriel that day, just so the house isn't so crowded." Muriel wasn't really a friend, just someone I'd had coffee with twice, but I nodded and said, "Sure." The next morning, I sat in bed and stared at the ceiling and wondered if I'd made a mistake. Maybe I should have stayed. Maybe the silence would have been easier than this distance, this feeling of being in the way. But it wasn't just the distance that started to hurt. It was the little things. The way Vince blamed me for misplacing the remote, even though I hadn't touched it. The way Tabitha started commenting on what I wore, what I ate, how often I watched the news. "Mom, that sweater makes you look older," she said one morning. "Wear the blue one I gave you for Christmas," and I changed without a word. They started asking questions about the house money, about Calvin's pension, about what I planned to do with the savings. It didn't sit right, but I didn't want to believe that their kindness had limits. I told myself they were just being practical. But then the vase broke, the one Vince's parents had given them. It was gone from the living room, and no one knew how it had happened. But Rosie had seen me dusting, and that was enough. I said I didn't remember breaking it, and I didn't, but they didn't believe me. I tried to apologize, tried to make it right, but it wasn't about the vase, not really, and I think that's what finally opened my eyes. The next morning, I woke early and stood in the kitchen thinking about making pancakes, Rosie's favorite since she was. Little Tabitha walked in, dressed for work. She didn't even look at me when she said, "No need, Mom. We've got cereal," I said. Maybe pancakes would cheer Jasper up, and that's when she looked at me for real and said, "Mom, please just let us live our lives." Okay, we were doing fine before you came. That's where I'll stop for now, because the next words out of her mouth changed everything, and the moment they left her lips, I knew I'd never be the same again. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there by the kitchen doorway, watching my daughter pour her coffee, like nothing had happened. The sunlight coming through the window caught the edge of her sleeve, a crisp blue blazer I didn't recognize. She looked tired, but also sharp, decisive, like someone used to taking charge. I could still hear the words she'd said echoing in my head. "We were doing fine before you came." She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't needed to. I took a step back. My hand was still resting on the edge of the kitchen counter. I wasn't even sure how long I'd been holding it. I just wanted to make pancakes, that's all. Something small, something comforting. I'd made them 1,000 times for her when she was a child, but now they were unwanted. I was unwanted. "I'm not trying to interfere," I said quietly. "But you are," she replied, still not turning around. "You're always offering advice, or making breakfast, or cleaning. It's like you're everywhere all the time, and it's exhausting." I don't remember what I said next. Maybe nothing. The conversation spun in circles, her voice rising, my throat tightening, until I found myself back in my room, sitting on the edge of the bed. I hadn't made it not that morning. The blanket was still folded at the foot, the pillow crumpled half off the side. The room was small, but comfortable, and I'd tried to make it my own, framed photos of Calvin, a few books, the knitting basket beside the chair. But that morning, it felt like a borrowed space again. A guest room. Temporary. I tried to breathe through it. I'd never been one for dramatic gestures, but my daughter had just told me in no uncertain terms that my presence was making her life harder, that I was too much. A burden. I stared at the dresser across from me at the mirror with the small smudge on the corner, and I didn't see myself. I saw someone trying too hard to be helpful in a house where help wasn't wanted. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking of all the things I could say, should say, about what it meant to be a mother, about how hard it had been to give up my home, about Calvin and the life we'd built. But there was no one to say them to. I got up around 3 a.m. and made tea. Sat by the window and watched the porch light flicker against the bushes. The silence wasn't peaceful. It felt suspended, like something waiting to fall. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. I needed to know where I stood. I wasn't about to keep living in limbo, unsure of my place. So I sat down at the kitchen table and wrote out a list. Nothing fancy, just a breakdown of my finances. Calvin and I had never been wealthy, but we'd saved. The house had sold for more than we expected. His insurance had come through. I still received part of his pension. All totaled, I had enough. Enough to live comfortably, enough to make my own choices. That realization sat with me all day. It settled into my chest like a quiet weight, not heavy, but solid. And once I had that, the next step came easier. I called Lorraine Pembroke, the lawyer who had helped with Calvin's estate. She remembered me right away. "Come in tomorrow morning," she said. 10 o'clock if that works. I left early the next day before anyone else was up. I left a note on the counter, said I was meeting a friend. It wasn't a lie. Lorraine may not have been someone I saw often, but I trusted her. Her office was in a narrow building just off Main Street brick with white shutters and a small sign by the door. Inside it smelled faintly of old paper and lemon polish. Lorraine greeted me in her usual way, brisk but kind. We sat across from each other in her office and I told her everything. I told her about the move, the tension, the conversations I hadn't wanted to have. I told her what Tabitha had said. I told her I was ready to make changes. She listened without interrupting, then nodded slowly and said, "Let's start with your will." It wasn't that I wanted to punish anyone, but I couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. The questions about money, the suggestions about investing, the unspoken expectations. I didn't want my life or what I left behind to be someone else's financial plan. So I told Lorraine what I wanted. Most of the money would go to causes I believed in: our local library, Alzheimer's research, in memory of my mother. Each grandchild would receive a set amount when they turned 25, but only for education or a first home. Tabitha and Fletcher would receive a modest sum. Nothing more. Lorraine didn't flinch. She wrote it all down carefully. "We'll have a draft ready next week," she said, "and we'll sign it properly with witnesses." After that, I walked to the bank. I asked about account options, ways to protect my savings, ways to plan ahead. The young man behind the desk was polite, patient, and never once made me feel old or out of place. I left with a folder full of information and a quiet confidence building in my chest. I wasn't done yet. There was still the matter of where to go. I started scanning rental listings in the local paper, circling apartments that looked clean and safe. Most were too modern or too expensive. But one caught my eye, a 2-bedroom in an older brick building on the east side of town. The ad mentioned high ceilings, wood floors, and a view of the courtyard. I made an appointment to see it that week. When I arrived, the landlord, Mr. Wells, met me at the front gate. He was in his 70s, wore suspenders over a pale blue shirt, and spoke with a slow, deliberate rhythm. "My daughter lived here," he said, unlocking the door. "She moved to California after she married. I didn't want to sell. Too many memories." The apartment smelled faintly of old wood and something warm like dried rosemary. The kitchen was small but bright. The living room had a bay window. The second bedroom would make a fine guest room or sewing nook. I stood in the middle of the space, listening to the stillness, and thought, this could be mine. I signed the lease that afternoon. There was one more stop to make. Just before heading home, I walked into a small antique shop I'd passed a dozen times but never entered. A help wanted sign hung in the window. I asked to speak to the owner, and when he emerged from the back, tall, thin, with wire-rimmed glasses and a kind face, I introduced myself and said I was looking for part-time work. He asked me about my interests. I told him Calvin and I used to collect small things, brooches, postcards, books, that I'd always appreciated the stories behind old objects. He smiled. "Most people just want a paycheck," he said, "but you understand history. That's what matters here." He offered me 3 days a week, enough to stay busy, not enough to feel tired. I said I'd start in 2 weeks. That night, I went home and sat at my desk with the folder from the bank, the draft of my new will, and the apartment lease. I tucked them all into a drawer and locked it. Then I made a list boxes to pack items, to move utilities, to transfer. My plan was almost complete. The only thing left was how to leave and when. I wanted no arguments, no guilt, no tears. Just a quiet goodbye. And that's exactly what I was going to do. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Tabitha and Vince were planning to take the kids out of town for the weekend. 2 days away. 48 hours to make a clean break. I smiled to myself and turned back to the list. There was still so much to do, but for the first time in months, I was looking forward to what came next. I waited until their car turned the corner before I closed the front door behind me. The house was quiet, too quiet, but not in the lonely way I used to feel back on Davenport Lane. this was different. It felt like the stillness before something changes. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the ticking clock above the coat rack, and then I got to work. My suitcase was already packed. Just the essentials, clothes, toiletries, a few framed photos. The rest had been boxed up and labeled earlier in the week. The moving truck had come that morning right on schedule. The driver, a quiet man with silver hair and kind eyes, helped me load the rocking chair and the mahogany chest of drawers without asking many questions. I had told him I was moving across town. That was enough. Back inside, I walked through the living room one last time. The armchair near the window, the pale rug, the vase that hadn't been replaced. I didn't linger. I went to the kitchen and placed 2 envelopes on the table, one addressed to Tabitha, the other to the grandchildren. I set them side by side, then stepped back and looked at the space where I had stood so many mornings with a coffee cup in hand, trying to guess how the day might unfold. I didn't take much food, just a tin of tea bags and a half-empty jar of strawberry jam. The pantry would stay full for them. I wasn't going far, but I wanted them to understand I wouldn't be coming back. By late afternoon, I was standing in the entryway of my new apartment. The boxes had already arrived, stacked neatly in the corner of the living room. Mr. Wells met me at the front door with a spare key and a warm loaf of banana bread wrapped in foil. "Welcome home," he said, and then left me to settle in. That night, I couldn't sleep. The bed felt different, not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. I listened to the rustle of leaves outside the window, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a train. It reminded me of being young again the first night Calvin and I moved into our old house, how we lay awake listening to the water heater creak and wondering if we'd made the right choice. I turned on the lamp beside the bed and read for a while, then finally drifted off sometime before sunrise. In the morning, I made toast and tea and sat by the window. No one asked me what time I planned to eat or if I was using too much electricity. I wore my green cardigan, the one Tabitha didn't like, and let my hair air dry. It was a small thing, but it stayed with me the whole day. I turned off my phone. I didn't want any messages, not right away. I needed space. I unpacked a little, hung up the curtains I'd picked out at the discount store, placed the photo of Calvin on the nightstand. The apartment still smelled faintly of fresh paint and floor wax, but it was starting to feel like home. 2 days later, my neighbor knocked on the door. I opened it to find Mr. Wells standing there holding a plate of scones. "Someone came by looking for you," he said. Blonde woman. Seemed upset. I thanked him. That was my daughter. He nodded slowly as if that explained everything. "Family's tricky," he said. "Time helps. Doesn't fix everything, but it helps." He didn't ask for details, and I didn't offer any. Later that week, I got a call from Muriel, the woman Tabitha had introduced me to when I first moved to Sherville. We'd had coffee a few times, nothing close, but enough to know she was kind. "Irma, are you all right?" she asked. "Tabitha's been calling everyone. Says she doesn't know where you are." "I'm fine," I said. "I just needed a change." "She's saying you disappeared," Muriel said, "that you left without warning and now she can't reach you." "I left a letter," I said, "and she's not looking for me. She's looking for control." There was a pause. Then she said, "She mentioned something about legal paperwork, that she needs to speak with you urgently." "I'm not ready," I said. "I understand," she said softly. "I just wanted to check on you." I thanked her, and we said goodbye. I started my new job the following Wednesday. The antique shop was small but beautiful brass handles on the drawers, velvet-lined shelves, the scent of wood polish and old paper. Mr. Dobson met me at the door with a smile and a short stack of paperwork. He showed me how to use the register, explained the discount policy, and then let me take my time getting to know the layout. The first customer who came in was a woman about my age, looking for a birthday gift for her mother. She stood for a long time at the glass case of brooches before asking for help. She's turning 70, she said. I want something that feels special. We chose a delicate cameo in a silver setting. As I wrapped it in tissue paper and tied the ribbon, she asked how long I'd been working there. Just a few days, I said. Starting a new chapter. She smiled. Good for you. That evening, I walked through the neighborhood and discovered a small cafe 2 blocks down with outdoor seating and lemon pie on the menu. There was a library on the corner and a park a few streets away with a pond and a row of benches shaded by tall trees. I made a note to return with my knitting one day soon. That Saturday, when I came back from the grocery store, Rosamond was sitting on the front steps of the building. Her backpack was beside her, and her chin rested on her knees. She stood when she saw me and hurried forward. Grandma, she said, hugging me tightly. You left us your address. I put a hand on her shoulder. I'm glad you came. I told Mom I was going to a friend's to study, she said. I wanted to see if you were okay. I unlocked the door and let her inside. She looked around slowly, taking in each room like she was memorizing it. It's cozy, she said. It's not like our house at all. She paused, then added, I like it. We had tea and cookies at the table. She told me about school, about a book she was reading about how her mom was upset and said I'd been selfish. Then she looked at me and asked, Are you really not coming back? I reached over and touched her hand. No, sweetheart, I'm not. But you can visit me any time. She nodded, though her eyes were sad. Jasper won't come, she said. He thinks you turned your back on the family. And you? I asked. She shrugged. I think everyone should be where they feel safe. I walked her to the bus stop when it was time for her to go. We stood together on the corner until the bus pulled up, and then she climbed aboard, turned once to wave, and disappeared through the doors. When I got back inside, the light was beginning to change. The sun dipped low against the windowsill, and the apartment glowed a soft gold. I checked my answering machine. There were 3 new messages, all from Tabitha. Each one more urgent than the last, each one asking me to call her back. But I didn't. Not yet. There was still more of this new life I needed to settle into first, and in the quiet that followed, I started to realize I wasn't hiding. I was healing, and for the first time in a long time, I was doing it on my own terms. Next Saturday couldn't come soon enough. The following Saturday, I arrived at the cafe just after 10. Rosamond was already there, sitting at the little metal table beneath the striped awning, her bag tucked beneath her chair and a paperback resting beside her cup. She spotted me and waved, her face softening with something between relief and warmth. I ordered you the chamomile, she said as I sat down. They still remember you. I smiled and settled into the chair. The morning was bright but cool, the kind of early spring air that carries just a whisper of winter still clinging to the breeze. Across the street, a man was walking a golden retriever. The dog stopped to sniff the same lamppost twice. Rosamond sipped her tea. So, she said, after a pause, Mom's still angry. But I think she's also scared. I didn't answer right away. I stirred a packet of honey into my cup, then looked up at her. Scared of what? She shrugged. That you'll leave forever? That she'll be stuck with all the things she said and no way to fix them. I'm not trying to punish her, I said quietly. I know. She tapped the rim of her glass with her fingernail. But I think maybe she's realizing what she lost. Or what she took for granted. I reached across the table and touched her hand. I'm not disappearing. I just needed space to breathe. We sat like that for a moment, the silence not heavy, just full. Then she opened her bag and pulled out a stack of papers bound with a rubber band. She told me not to show you these, she said, placing them on the table. But I think you need to see them. I hesitated, then slipped off the band and began flipping through. The top sheet was an outline of a proposed trust account listing percentages and contingencies. Further down were notes about power of attorney healthcare proxies and something marked revocable trust restructuring. I looked up at her, frowning. She and Vince were meeting with a financial planner, Rosamond said. Before you left, they were trying to figure out how to simplify your estate. My fingers tightened slightly on the edges of the paper. When 2 weeks before you moved out, she said. She thought if she could convince you to sign some of it over, they'd be able to manage everything efficiently. That's the word she used. I leaned back, letting the pages settle on the table. The sun had shifted slightly, casting a slanted line of light across my knees. She kept saying it was for your protection, Rosamond added softly. But it never felt like that. The waitress came by with a refill, and we paused while she poured. After she left, I took a breath and folded the documents back into a neat stack. Thank you, I said, for trusting me with this. She was upset when I asked questions, Rosamond said. Said I didn't understand how things worked. But I do, and I knew you deserved to make your own choices. We parted with a hug outside the cafe. She promised to call the next week and asked if I'd help her with a paper for her English class. As she walked away, I watched her blend into the current of foot traffic, her ponytail swaying behind her like it did when she was 10 years old, and still asking me to braid it before school. When I got home, I set the documents on my kitchen counter and stood there a long while. Then I called Lorraine Pembroke. I'd like to schedule a meeting, I said, sooner rather than later. She fit me in for Monday afternoon. I took the bus into town and walked the rest of the way to her office, the same red brick building with the peeling white shutters. Her assistant offered me a seat, and not 5 minutes later, Lorraine waved me in. She listened carefully as I explained what I'd learned. Then she leaned back in her chair and said, Do you remember what I told you when we drafted your will, that you are not required to explain your boundaries to anyone, but you do have the right to enforce them? I nodded. Then let's take steps to reinforce the protections, she said. It's your life. No one else gets to sign it away. Over the next hour, we updated the documents. She showed me how to add restrictions on transferability, how to designate third-party oversight if anything were to happen to me, and how to remove anyone from my accounts who might pose a conflict of interest. When I left her office, the air felt sharper. Not cold exactly, just clearer. That evening, I walked to the antique shop to drop off some receipts. Mr. Dobson was just finishing up for the day, the store smelling faintly of cedar oil and old cloth bindings. He handed me a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. Someone brought this in earlier, he said. Didn't want any money. Said it looked like something you might appreciate. I opened it once I got home. Inside was a silver photo frame tarnished along one edge with a pressed lace border around the glass. It held a black and white photo of a woman standing by a garden gate, sunlight dappling her shoulders. There was no note, no name. I set it on the windowsill and looked out across the courtyard. A boy rode past on a blue bike. 2 neighbors chatted on a bench beneath the oak. Somewhere behind me, the kettle began to whistle. The next morning, I mailed a letter to Tabitha. Not angry, not accusing, just clear. I told her I had seen the documents, that I understood the intentions behind them, that I was taking steps to ensure my autonomy legally and financially, and that I was not closing the door to a future relationship, but it would have to be one built on mutual respect, not expectation. I didn't wait for a reply. Instead, I called Rosamond and invited her over for dinner the following week. I picked up fresh vegetables at the market, dusted off my old pie dish, and even bought a small bouquet of daffodils from the corner stand. When she arrived, she handed me a gift bag with a scarf she'd crocheted herself. I know it's not perfect, she said. I draped it over my shoulders. It's perfect to me. We ate by candlelight, the curtains drawn against the early evening chill. After dessert, we moved to the sofa and listened to the radio for a while. She asked if she could stay the night, and I said yes. I set up the guest room with fresh linens and a cup of water beside the bed, just like I used to when she was younger. Long after she fell asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around my tea mug, listening to the quiet hum of the apartment. It no longer felt borrowed. It felt like mine, and I was finally ready to stop waiting for someone else's permission to live in it. The next letter would not be written in silence. The following Wednesday, just before closing, I wiped down the antique display case near the register and turned the key in the drawer. Mr. Dobson had already left for the evening. He had a dentist appointment, and I'd offered to lock up. The shop was quiet. Rain tapped gently against the front window, and the old floorboards creaked a little under my shoes as I walked through the main aisle, checking each lamp, straightening a few cards on the stationery rack. I paused near the jewelry cabinet. The same cameo brooch Rosamond and I had chosen weeks ago still sat there, nestled in its velvet holder. It hadn't sold. I reached in and turned it slightly, just enough to catch the light differently, then stood back and looked around the shop one last time. That's when I heard the bell over the door. I turned, expecting a late customer, but it was Tabitha. She was holding a folded umbrella and wearing the navy blue coat I'd bought her last Christmas. Her eyes darted around the room before landing on me. "I didn't know you were working here," she said, her voice quiet but sharp around the edges. "I'm surprised you found out," I said, walking back toward the counter. She stepped inside and let the door shut behind her. "Rosamond told me. I asked her where you were spending your time these days, and she finally caved." "I asked her not to get in the middle," I said. "She's 17, Tabitha replied, setting her umbrella in the metal bin near the door. "She shouldn't have to be the one carrying this burden." I didn't answer. I picked up a cloth and began wiping down the countertop again slowly. "Mom," she said, stepping closer, "you didn't need to disappear like this. We could have worked it out." "I didn't disappear," I said gently. "I just left." She stared at me for a moment, then opened her purse and pulled out a white envelope. "There's a family meeting Saturday. Vince and I think it's time we sort things out legally. Jasper's flying in from Minnesota. We need to make a plan moving forward." I looked at the envelope but didn't take it. She set it on the counter. "We're not trying to push you out. We just want to make sure you're protected." I nodded once. "You said that before, when you were drafting paperwork behind my back." Her jaw tensed, but she didn't deny it. The clock behind her ticked on, slow and deliberate. "I can't come to that meeting," I said. "I've already spoken to Lorraine. My decisions are made. Then you're forcing us to go through attorneys," she snapped. "That's not what I want," I said, "but it's what I'll do if I have to." For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint click of the rain against the glass. She turned to go, pausing just before the door. "You're choosing to break this family." "No," I said. "I'm choosing not to be broken by it." She didn't look back as she left. After she was gone, I sat in the small chair behind the register and stared at the envelope for a long time before sliding it into the drawer unopened. That weekend, Rosamond came by again. She helped me pick up groceries, and we walked through the farmer's market together. There was a woman selling hand-painted bowls, and Rosamond chose a blue one with little daisies on the rim. "For your kitchen," she said, holding it up, "so it doesn't feel like you're starting over from nothing." We ate lunch at the park and sat on a bench near the duck pond. The wind rustled the tall grass, and a boy on a scooter zipped past with a trail of laughter behind him. "I didn't go to the family meeting," she said unprompted. "They were upset." "I figured." "Jasper flew in like Mom said, but I don't think he was there to mediate. I think he was there to make sure she didn't say too much." I didn't reply. She leaned back against the bench and pulled her knees up slightly. She said you cut her out. But you didn't. You just stepped away. I nodded, watching a duck dip its beak into the water. She doesn't know what to do with that, Rosamond said. She only knows how to fight or fix, not how to listen. That evening, when I got back to the apartment, I opened the envelope Tabitha had left behind. Inside were typed notes labeled Care Plan Discussion, along with suggested schedules, power of attorney documents, and a handwritten sticky note. We'll all feel better when this is formalized. I folded it all back up and slid it into a file folder at the back of my desk drawer. Then I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on. The next day, I stopped by the community center to check on the volunteer list. I'd signed up to help with the senior craft group on Thursdays. There was a clipboard on the corkboard with my name written in blue ink, right next to a woman named Agnes who waved to me from down the hall. That evening, I called Lorraine. I want to make a formal declaration, I said. I want it on record that I am of sound mind and making decisions of my own volition. She agreed and scheduled a notary visit for the following Monday. I'll handle the paperwork, she said. You just focus on building the life you want. That night, I pulled out my old knitting bag and began a new project, a shawl for Rosamond in soft green yarn, the color of spring grass after rain. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't working from someone else's pattern, and it felt like something was finally starting to take shape. The notary came to the apartment on a Tuesday morning. Lorraine sat with me at the table while I signed the document's clear legal language stating that I was competent in full control of my finances and that no guardianship or medical proxy had been granted to anyone. We made copies. I kept one. She took the others. By noon, it was official. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something settle in my chest. Not peace exactly, but steadiness. 2 days later, I picked up an extra shift at Dobson's. Mr. Dobson was visiting his sister in Raleigh, and he left me in charge for the afternoon. Around 3 o'clock, I was restocking a shelf of vintage clocks when the front door opened. Vince. He stood just inside the threshold, scanning the room like he'd stepped into a place he didn't believe I belonged. He had on one of those pale blue golf shirts he always wore on weekends. Behind him, someone else entered Jasper. My son. He was taller than I remembered, but thinner too. His hair had more gray around the temples. He didn't smile when he saw me. He just nodded once as if we were strangers being introduced at a dinner party. Mom, he said, we need to talk. I walked back behind the counter, wiped my hands on a cloth, and waited. We came because we think you're making decisions that aren't in your best interest, Vince said. The apartment, the job, that lawyer, none of this is sustainable. I'm doing just fine, I said. We're not here to argue, Jasper added. We're here to help. But we need you to meet us halfway. Vince pulled a folded document from his back pocket and laid it on the counter. A revised agreement, he said. It gives you monthly access to the house sale money, but ensures that long-term decisions stay within the family. I didn't touch it. Jasper added. You'll still have control, Mom. We're just trying to create a safety net. You mean a leash? I said. Neither of them flinched. I already filed everything with my attorney, I continued, and I had the documents notarized. That's not enough, Vince said, if you're being coerced. Coerced? I looked at him. He gestured vaguely around the shop. This whole situation, it's not normal. You working retail, living in a tiny apartment over a bakery? That's not you. I decide who I am, I said. Not you, not Tabitha. Not anyone else. Jasper sighed and took a step back. We were hoping to avoid court, he said. But if that's where this is headed, we'll do what we have to. I watched them leave. The door closed behind them with a soft chime. I didn't move. Not for a long time. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the file folder Lorraine had prepared for me. I pulled it open, checked each page again, made sure everything was signed, witnessed, and complete. I wasn't scared exactly, but I knew then they weren't going to let this go. The next morning, I called Lorraine. They came to the shop, I said. Vince and Jasper. I figured they might, she said. Let me handle the response. We'll file a formal notice of guardianship resistance. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. That just means they can't pursue legal control without going through a full competency hearing, she explained. It's a process, but we'll be ready. That weekend, I found an envelope slipped under my apartment door. No return address. Inside was a printed photo me standing at the cash register, smiling while wrapping a customer's purchase. The timestamp in the corner showed it had been taken the day before. No note. Just the picture. I tucked it into the back of the folder, then walked straight to the bakery downstairs and asked Ellen if her security camera had caught anything unusual. She promised to check. The next day, Rosamond came by after school. I made tomato soup and grilled cheese the way Calvin used to thin slices of apple tucked inside for sweetness. She told me about her history project, about how her teacher was assigning them to interview someone over 65 about a major life decision. She asked if she could interview me. I said yes. She took out a little recorder and asked, "When did you realize you needed to choose your own path?" I looked at her sitting across from me in her hoodie and socks, her hair pulled up in a loose braid. Just recently, I said. But the signs were there for a long time. She pressed the button to stop the recording and leaned her chin on her hand. I'm proud of you, she said softly. That night, I received a certified letter. Jasper and Vince had initiated a petition for temporary guardianship, citing concern for my well-being and capacity. The hearing was scheduled for the end of the month. I called Lorraine. She was calm. We'll respond accordingly, she said, and we'll win. Later that evening, as I folded laundry, I came across the green shawl I'd made for Rosamond. I'd forgotten to give it to her. I wrapped it in tissue paper, slid it into a small box, and wrote her name on the top in cursive. Just before bed, I placed the box by the front door. And then I sat down, took out a fresh sheet of paper, and began writing a letter. Not to the court, not to Tabitha or Vince, to myself, to the woman who once thought staying quiet meant keeping peace, to the woman who'd sold her home thinking she was being taken in with love, only to be managed like an asset. I wrote it all down, and when I finished, I tucked it away in the drawer beside my bed. Because something was shifting now, not just legally, but inside me. And I knew the next time we stood in that courtroom, they wouldn't be the ones holding the ground. The courthouse lobby smelled faintly of lemon polish and old carpet. I stood at the metal detector, while a security guard glanced at my handbag and waved me through. Lorraine met me at the elevator, her blazer pressed, her glasses tucked into the front of her shirt. She handed me a small folder. Just the essentials, she said quietly. Your affidavit, a copy of the witness list and the medical clearance. I took it. We rode up in silence. The courtroom itself was smaller than I'd expected. No grand chandeliers or polished mahogany, just a tired-looking judge's bench, 2 rows of pew-style seating, and the steady hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Jasper and Vince sat together at one of the front tables. Vince's arm was stretched along the back of Jasper's chair like he was perfectly at ease. Tabitha wasn't with them. Lorraine and I took our seats. A bailiff called the case number, and then it began. Your Honor, Lorraine said, standing with calm in her voice, we are prepared to demonstrate that Mrs. Wembley is of sound mind, fully capable of managing her own affairs, and that this petition is not only unfounded, but retaliatory. Vince's lawyer, a man named Rollins, rose next. We're not here to insult anyone. he began, smiling toward the judge. "But we have reason to believe that Mrs. Wembley is currently under undue influence. Her recent behavior, including the sudden liquidation of shared family assets and the employment of unfamiliar legal counsel, raises concerns." The judge was an older woman with a narrow face and no jewelry. Her nameplate read, Honorable M. Swinton. She looked at me, then back at the attorneys. "Proceed." Lorraine called me to the stand first. I walked slowly, my shoes quiet on the floor. When I sat, she handed me a printed page. "Is this the affidavit you provided, Mrs. Wembley?" she asked. "Yes, it is. And did you sign it voluntarily, under no pressure from anyone I did?" She walked me through the timeline, how the house was sold under encouragement from my son and daughter-in-law, how my finances were placed into joint management without my full understanding of the consequences, how I'd been given weekly allowances from the account that bore my name alone. Then she asked me if I felt safe now. I said yes. When Rollins stepped up, he tried a different tactic. "Mrs. Wembley, how old are you? 78? And do you take any medications? Blood pressure, thyroid? Nothing affecting memory? Do you work? I do. Do you live alone? I do." He paused. "Do you ever feel confused, say about finances or daily routines?" "No." He turned to the judge. "We'd like to submit 3 voice recordings," he said, taken from voicemails left on Mr. Jasper Wembley's phone, in which Mrs. Wembley expresses confusion and distress. Lorraine objected. "Context, Your Honor. These were left during the period when Mrs. Wembley was being denied access to her own accounts." Objection sustained. The recordings were dismissed. The next witness Lorraine called was Dr. King, my physician. He spoke clearly, calmly. "Her memory's intact. Her judgment is sound. She's grieving, yes, but not delusional, and certainly not incompetent." Then came Ellen from the bakery, then Mr. Dobson, and finally Rosamond's school counselor, who had written a brief statement about my role in Rosamond's support circle. Rollins declined to cross-examine any of them. When Jasper took the stand, he looked at me only once. "We're not trying to hurt her," he said, "but we've watched her change, withdraw from the family, align herself with people we don't know. She used to host Sunday dinners. Now she barely returns our calls." Lorraine stood. "Mr. Wembley, did you change the locks on your mother's former home before or after she signed the deed over after?" "Did you inform her?" He didn't answer. She repeated, "Did you tell her no?" He said. When Vince was called, his confidence shifted. He answered stiffly. Said he was doing what was best said. My income had concerned him for years, that my financial choices had always leaned too sentimental. "You mean like paying for your daughter's therapy?" Lorraine asked. He didn't respond. The judge asked for a recess before giving her ruling. We waited outside, sitting on a bench near the vending machines. Lorraine didn't speak. Neither did I. When we were called back in, Judge Swinton took a breath. "In cases such as these," she began, "the court must balance protection with autonomy. But I see no evidence here of diminished capacity. No medical cause for concern, and no legal reason to interfere with Mrs. Wembley's rights." She turned to Vince and Jasper. "This petition is denied. You are instructed to refrain from further attempts to control or access Mrs. Wembley's financial assets without her explicit written consent." A gavel tapped once. Court adjourned. Lorraine packed up the folder. I stood slowly, legs a little numb, but steady. Vince and Jasper walked out ahead of us. They didn't look back. In the parking lot, Lorraine handed me a small card. "If they approach you again, call me immediately." I nodded. That night, I returned to my apartment and opened every window. The air was warm and smelled faintly of bread from the bakery below. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in the armchair near the window with the court transcript in my lap. I didn't read it. I just sat there, letting the silence be mine again. The next morning, Rosamond stopped by before school. She held up the shawl I'd made her and spun in a slow circle. "It's perfect," she whispered. I reached into my desk drawer, pulled out the letter I'd written to myself, the one from the night before the hearing, and placed it in a new envelope. Then I wrote a name on the front. Not mine. Hers. Because someday she might need to know how you stand your ground when the world tries to take it from you. And I wanted her to have something that reminded her where she came from, where we both came from, and what no one could take from us again. Somewhere around late spring, the trees outside my apartment began to bloom again. Rosamond and I would walk down to the community garden on Sundays, passing the same neighbor who always wore her sun hat a little too early in the season. I'd bring a folding chair and some embroidery. Rosamond brought her sketch pad. Sometimes we didn't talk much. We didn't need to. She sat close enough that I could hear her pencil brushing paper, and I'd glance over to find she'd drawn the same tree over and over again, each time from a new angle. I never asked why. I think some things don't need explaining. Tabitha didn't come back, not really. She called once in June, left a voicemail, said she was trying to make peace with the past. I let it sit for a few days before deleting it. I didn't need to reopen doors I'd already closed. I'd done what I could. The rest was hers to carry. Jasper and Vince stayed quiet after the hearing. I heard they listed their house not long after. Whether they needed the money or just couldn't bear to live with the silence, I'll never know. But I no longer flinched when the phone rang or worried about who might show up unannounced. That part of my life had ended, and I'd survived it. The bakery downstairs gave me a part-time spot organizing the books and helping with inventory. It wasn't glamorous work, but it kept my mind sharp and my hands busy. And every now and then, a customer would wander in needing help reading a label or counting change, and I'd smile and show them slowly, gently. I think there's a certain kindness in being seen, especially when the world tries to move too fast for people like us. One Friday, Rosamond asked if I'd come to her school's art show. I dressed carefully that evening. Nothing too fancy, just a pale blue cardigan and the necklace James gave me on our last anniversary. She met me by the door and led me into a crowded room that smelled like glue and poster board. Her drawing was pinned up near the front. It was the tree from the garden. Only this time, there were two women sitting beneath it, one sketching, one sewing. No faces, just outlines. But I knew exactly who they were. She squeezed my hand and didn't say anything. She didn't need to. That night, after she'd gone home, I sat at my little desk and took out the letter I'd written her, the one from before the hearing. I'd sealed it in an envelope weeks ago, never intending to give it to her yet. But something told me it was time. I slipped it into her sketchbook the next morning while she was making toast. No ceremony, no speeches, just a quiet offering for a girl who had helped me remember who I was. Sometimes people think justice means loud declarations or dramatic endings. But the truth is, the real kind of justice, the one that lasts, is quiet. It's in the way you open your own front door with your own key. The way you sleep through the night without fear. The way you smile without asking permission. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that dignity doesn't come from who loves you the loudest or who claims to know what's best for you. It comes from knowing deep down that you are enough, that you've lived, survived, and chosen to keep going anyway. Thank you for listening to my story. If it reminded you of someone you care about, or even a part of yourself, I hope you'll hold that close. And if you ever feel like the world has forgotten, you remember this: sometimes the quietest voices carry the deepest strength. Take care of yourself. And if you're ever in the mood for a walk beneath the trees, I hope the sky is gentle and the path kind beneath your feet.